police officers carry this backpack, and every time they go to a job, we pick up a pebble and it goes in the backpack. And anyone can carry, a handful of pebbles around or a pocket full of pebbles, but eventually when that backpack fills up with pebbles, it's heavy.
Hello and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. In the last 2 episodes, we spoke to some professors about post-traumatic stress disorder to gain their expert academic perspective on it. For the next few episodes, we are going to be speaking with a range of first responders who have experienced PTSD. My guest today is Andrew Ayres, a Queensland police detective who has had a journey with PTSD. Andrew joined the police field in 1992 and is soon celebrating his 30th year in the force. In this episode, Andrew describes how PTSD has affected his life, relationships, and how he has developed ways of living a great life even with PTSD as a part of it. Hello, Andrew, and welcome to Wellbeing.
Morning, Jack. Thank you for having me.
Before we begin, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, Andrew?
Certainly. So I'm a detective sergeant currently in the Queensland Police Service. I have been since 1992, so May 2022 is the 30-year milestone. In my spare time, I enjoy helping other police officers who've walked a similar path with the tough times that they're experiencing.
You're the founding director of Blue Hope. Can you tell us a little bit about Blue Hope and how it came to be?
Certainly. So back in 2014, there was quite a high-profile and public suicide up in Queensland, and sadly that was the 4th or 5th member of the QPS or serving member of the QPS that I was aware had taken their own life. And it just got me to thinking. I did some research, or some extensive research, and I realised that there was a gap in existing welfare services. And that gap basically related to people who, for whatever reason, just did not want to put their hand up for help for fear of the stigma that was attached, and still is to some degree, to, I guess, asking for help, especially in this context. So, what started as basically a few cups of coffees with people that I knew were struggling, just to listen to them and to provide some assistance or some support, has now turned into what you see today, Blue Hope Support Services Limited. So it's to say that it's out of control in a good way is an understatement.
Did you ever experience trouble with PTSD in any way?
Yes, I guess when I first started in the police, we didn't refer to it as PTSD or depression or anxiety. It was just something that occurred in the background that was usually dealt with over a few beers amongst your mates, and some people dealt with it better than others. But what we now know and is widely recognised as PTSD, yes, in actual fact, I'm happy to admit that I believe, struggled at times. And like I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So what may be inconsequential to one member of my fraternity could be a gigantic issue to another. So it's funny. I think any police officer that's done any time on the front lines that says they don't have PTSD to some degree probably isn't being as truthful as they should be.
What are some experiences that come to your mind from your long career that may have contributed to PTSD in yourself?
That's a good question. I've been a detective for a long time, in my 30 years. So although the first responders and the general duties officers are the first to a scene, it's usually myself and my colleagues that see the major investigations through to finalisation. And look, you can't go past anything involving children. Sadly we see that the absolute worst that humanity has to offer, and anything that involves children stays with you for a long time, because there's always irrespective of how often it happens or how often you're involved in something that involves, the significant injury or the death of a child, even in our role, we often walk away thinking, what else could we have done? And I guess there's that, in answer to your question, that fear of failure, which is completely out of context when you look at it from a professional perspective. But yeah, you just sometimes you wonder, could I have done more? What else could I have done to prevent that? And the answer inevitably is nothing. We can't be in individual households 24/7 to protect the most vulnerable. But I can tell you, mate, it knocks you for a six when you see what some men and women are capable of.
In the police force now, you mentioned how back in the day when you first started, how people kind of dealt with the mental health aspect. Has that gotten better in the police force over time?
Yeah, it has. Look, I often refer to it as we're now standing at the base of Mount Everest, whereas previously we weren't even in the country. So even though there's a lot of work to do, I can say hand on heart that, the current Queensland Police Commissioner, Katarina Carroll, has really embraced the internal support mechanisms and improved them. So yes, the answer to that, especially amongst my colleagues, is yes. There's never been a better time now to put your hand up and say that I'm struggling. I mean, look, when you're at the pub with your mates after a significant incident, the old catchphrase was take a teaspoon of concrete and harden up. Tomorrow's another day and everything will be better. Well, that mentality for too long was absolutely killing us, quite literally. So now that you can put your hand up and get very rapid professional help, acute help if that's required, is a massive step forward.
Is there a moment that you can recall, the first moment when you kind of said to yourself and kind of almost admitted to yourself that there's something going on here with my mental health because of the things I've kind of seen and experienced?
Yeah, so I guess I couldn't put my finger on one particular incident, but it was an accumulation of things for me. I did what many people, not only in the police fraternity, but many people around the world, and I just thought I can drink my issues away, and the sad reality of that is that it doesn't matter how much you drink, the next day the problem's still there. So, I'm quite happy to put my hand up and say that's where I thought the solution to my issues lay. But what became more effective for me was when I realised that was no longer a once a week or once a fortnight social outing, was becoming a daily sort of issue, and you get really good at hiding things, And look, I'll be upfront and I'll say, I in terms of my own family, I would come home and be by myself and consume whatever alcohol was around, and then I would go to extreme lengths to hide the empties, so nobody knew. And then inevitably there was, on occasion, I would be asleep in bed, and my partner, she obviously knew that there were issues there, but that was the way that I dealt with it. I felt that I couldn't discuss how I was feeling. I couldn't be vulnerable in that context for whatever reason. But what I realise now, and I guess Blue Hope's helped me do that, is that the absolute best thing you can do is lay all your cards on the table, because it's not the end of the world. The fact that you and please understand, thankfully I don't have what they refer to as flashbacks. So that doesn't happen to me. I can free recall anything at any time, but there are people out there that cannot remove those images from their minds. And again, when you're talking about first response to a significant crime involving children, you can't unsee stuff like that. And what I found in my own journey was that the best thing you can do is to get it out, is to talk to someone, and if that's a professional, if that's one of your mates, it doesn't matter, your partner. We go through life as cops, Jack, and we just think that no one in the world can ever understand what we go through. No one can ever understand what we see or relate to it because they don't do it. Well, that's a cop-out, because no matter, of course, you don't want to sit down and go into explicit detail about what we see and what we do, but by and large, our partners, our friends, whether they're in law enforcement or not, they can absolutely empathise with us when we're in pain, and we need to embrace that. And for so long we haven't. My way of thinking is better out than in. Have a chat. You're not going to shock me. I'm not going to be put off by it. And I think that we really need to, and across our entire society, law enforcement aside, we need to be prepared to just listen to each other a bit more, I think, and, say, well, look, I haven't walked in your shoes, but, what, I can see you're doing it tough and I'm here for you, mate.
You're listening to Wellbeing,
a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. My guest today is Queensland Police Detective Andrew Ayres, where we are discussing his journey with PTSD.
How common would you say PTSD is in police officers?
If you've spent enough time on the front line, and that could be a month, you know, I have come across police officers in their early 20s who really have had next to no conflict in their life, who in the first 6 months of their police service have been to the most horrific traffic accidents and have had to pick up the pieces of the most heinous domestic violence situations. And that happens in a very short space of time. And what I guess some members of the public don't quite realise is that's day in, day out, 8 hours a day, and that's, you know, it often the conversation often turns to, well, you signed up for that, and I go, yeah, okay, I'm happy, I love what I do for a living. I said, but I can't try and make you understand how repeated exposure to those things, the dramatic effect it has on an individual. So you can have a police officer that goes 10 years is quite shielded. It depends on the environment, you know. But some of these young kids who have really only started living their adult lives, all of a sudden have to carry these memories and the exposure to, as I said, the most horrific scenes. Like I said before, mate, if you've done significant time or even been exposed to one traumatic incident, you know, I think PTSD monster is there. It's just with it, we now have to be better at how we deal with that, you know. So some people deal with it better than others, and those that can't deal with it, well, that they don't have very long careers.
When was the first time that PTSD was really acknowledged in the police force? Was there a time where, because you mentioned before, like there was a time where it wasn't really acknowledged, but then over time it has become more acknowledged. When was the time where it started to become acknowledged?
I would think organisationally, probably around 2015. I reckon there was a dramatic shift where we realised, okay, we can do this a whole lot better. So the QPS have always had internal support mechanisms, but I think the rank and file probably acknowledged the existence of it before that. But what happened, Jack, was that there was a stigma attached with accessing those support mechanisms. So, you know, if you're working in a high-tempo environment where, I guess, for want of a better word, you need to be the alpha male, from a career perspective, if you start saying that you can't sleep at night because you're constantly reliving a particular incident, you know, then the general consensus was, I can't tell anybody that because, you know, I'll be thrown off the promotion train. So my career will be halted because people will see me as weak, or people will see me as no longer that alpha male that I need to be in order to get this job done. So, you know, I think we've always recognised that it existed, but that stigma, which still exists, you know, was probably the overriding factor insofar as people seeking assistance. So there are, as I said, that statement before, take a teaspoon of concrete and harden up. That's in policing, that's been the way for so long. But like I said, that mentality was literally killing us. And in 2015, 2014, 2015, following that high-profile suicide that I spoke about, I think people started to realise, okay, we need to be better. We need to absolutely recognise this for what it is, and basically tell our staff members that it's okay to have a bad day.
What are some ways that we can really work on that stigma a bit more?
Oh, look, I think we're very judgmental, and you've got to bear in mind, Jack, that most people, I don't think, are exposed to police officers other than getting a traffic ticket or getting someone knocking on their door and telling them to turn the stereo down. And you know what? We police consistently a percentage of the population, most of which are very supportive, most of which are general law-abiding citizens who the thought of having any significant interaction with cops other than a traffic ticket or, you know, your house being broken into would be traumatic enough alone for them. So what they don't understand is the guy that comes around to tell you to turn your music down and perhaps is a little bit direct or maybe even rude about it has just come from a child death. So that's a lot to process. So how do we help that? I think, you know, it's like anything in 2022, we just need to be a little more tolerant. It's a difficult question because we just need to understand that by very virtue of the fact that that gentleman or that lady's wearing that uniform, you don't know where they've just come from. You don't know what they've just done. Yes, they're issuing you with a $180 traffic ticket right now, but they could have just come from, a very significant domestic violence situation. They could have come from the watch house where someone threw urine at them or spat on them or threw feces at them or something like that is completely foreign in nature to everybody else, but that's our lives. That's our day-to-day existence.
What became harder for you in your life with PTSD?
I guess hiding it. It became a constant challenge to not acknowledge that there was a problem and to keep hiding it from the workplace, because I was still expected that I would turn up and do the job and do it at a high level, which became increasingly more difficult because you kind of go into, I think at times you can go into a bit of a self-preservation mode where, okay, so I know I'm struggling, I can't tell anyone about it, but I don't really want to expose myself to those things again anymore, everything that I've seen and done contributes to it in some way, but you kind of get to the point where you think, oh, well, I don't want to expose myself to that anymore. So you look for excuses as to why you don't have to go to that crime scene, or can someone else do it, without actually saying, look, what I should have said was, hey, mate, my cup's like really full of blood and guts, so I can't go to that crime scene. I'll stay back and do the admin stuff at the station. Could you mind going and doing and most people these days would just go, yeah, no problem. Because look, there are, not everybody struggles with PTSD the same as others. And look, in my personal circumstances, I'm very lucky that I've been able to compartmentalise a lot of stuff, and it doesn't haunt me. But there are people who literally cannot. The thought of going and getting into a police car, it causes so much anxiety that they can't even leave the house, and that's the worst case scenario. Yeah.
How did it feel for you when you begun to start opening up about these things?
It was a load off my shoulders, that's for sure. And one thing that I've probably preached a little on in the last, or since Blue Hope started in 2014, is that I can guarantee you, and I've spoken at lots and lots and lots of events and gatherings of people in the mental health space where I've told aspects of my story, and one of the things that I hark back to is the simple fact that I can guarantee you in this room full of police officers how you're feeling now. If you look across the table, that guy's probably feeling exactly the same way, but we're just too proud to bring it up. The amount of times that I've spoken to people that are, again, in very high tempo jobs, dynamic roles, and when I do sort of touch on things that have affected me, and that person just turns around and says, you know what, I feel exactly the same way, or I went through that last year, or, yeah. So, I mean, we just need to be more comfortable embracing the reality of what we do, and the reality of what we do is we carry baggage, There's a really good anecdote that relates to a backpack, and police officers carry this backpack, and every time they go to a job, we pick up a pebble and it goes in the backpack, and people think to themselves, oh, anyone can carry, a handful of pebbles around or a pocket full of pebbles, but eventually when that backpack fills up with pebbles, it's heavy, and it slows you down, and you're not as active because you've got to carry this backpack everywhere. So, my advice to anybody in my situation is, every now and again, take that backpack off and empty it.
Did you find for yourself that the PTSD was ever cured, or is it something that needs ongoing management?
No. I don't think it's ever going to be cured. It's just how you just learn to live with it. And, I've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of police officers who required much more acute treatment than I ever needed. And they talk about triggers. They talk about environmental factors that they know if they put themselves, and this could be, look, I'll use a real example. This could be going into the butcher, and seeing, blood. A young lady that I know quite well, one of her triggers is just going into the butcher. She can't go into a butcher, and she knows that. So the point I'm trying to make is she realises that someone else has got to go and buy her meat, or she has has to buy meat for pre-packed from Coles. She can't go to the butcher for fear of seeing something that will trigger her and send her spiralling, and which inevitably results in her being bedridden. So, triggers is the biggest thing. And, when you see somebody who has fully embraced where they are psychologically and will outwardly say, and this only happened to me the other day, will outwardly say, "What are you guys talking about? Can you just let me know and I'll leave the room?" Because that individual knew that if we started talking about a particular crime scene, which I'm able to do quite comfortably, that he would end up, having to go back and see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. So that's the reality of it, And if you're aware of your triggers, then I think more power to you. That to me is an absolute adult way of dealing with this problem,
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. My guest today is Queensland Police Detective Ayres, where we are discussing his journey with PTSD.
What are the ways that a family member can help someone that's affected by PTSD?
Just non-judgmental listening, I think, is the first step. There's a lot of shame, Jack, and a lot of guilt that accompanies PTSD, because with my situation, I acknowledge that I drank too much in order to deal with it. That's no longer an issue. But, you wake up some mornings and it's not the PTSD that you're concerned about or you feel guilty about. It's the fact that you felt the need to drink, 2/3 of a bottle of scotch or whatever your poison. And that's how because you just don't want to appear weak, mate, I think that it's interesting that, police officers in an 8-hour shift can go and deal with all sorts of problems in this world. Like, they can go and sort out, domestic disputes, and they can get other people's lives in order. But we're just so terrible at looking after our own, We go and solve everybody else's problems, but we don't seem to be able to, as a priority, confront our own demons and then rectify those. So, yeah, for me, it was difficult for me to discuss in the family, because that by discussing with my family, that would be me acknowledging, or that was me acknowledging that I was weak. So, there's a lot of pride involved, and you just, anybody that can see that their partner or significant other is struggling, it has to be an absolute non-judgmental ear. And if for some reason you do, or someone was to highlight their deficiencies and highlight their struggles, and then the person listening basically said, "Are you joking? Like, what's wrong with you?" That would, I think, to some people, that would just be catastrophic.
What would be the take-home from this interview you'd want people to remember the most?
Let's just be tolerant with one another. You don't know what journey that person's on. And I say to my junior staff all the time, just understand that statement that you're taking, or that interview that you're doing, is probably the most significant interaction with police that person will ever have. It might be your fifth statement for the day, but just bear in mind that person, it's their first time, and that they are broken. And that same rule applies to everybody. We just everybody's on their own journey. You never know what someone has done immediately prior to the conversation you're having with them. And, I'm not suggesting anyone becomes punching bags, but, just understand that person could have, like I said, could have come from a really, really significant traffic accident which resulted in a fatality. And I can assure you that no matter how many of those you go to, you remember every single one of them. We just need to be a little more tolerant, mate. So if there's one takeaway, that's it. Everyone just take a breath. Take a breath.
Well, thank you for being on the show today, Andrew. You gave some great insights.
Many thanks for having me, mate. I appreciate your time.
My guest today was Queensland Police Detective Ayres. Tune in next time, where we speak with a Canadian police officer about their journey with PTSD. And if you like this content, check out the rest of our series on PTSD. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.